All right, so now we're going to take a look at the Buck 119 and its clone side by side. All right, so this one's the Buck. Has this black strip here and this black strip here, and this is the Harbor Freight version of it. Now, this knife normally is about $65. I've seen it as high as $90 in certain places, and this one was 20 bucks. So let's dive right in with comparing. So let's start with the sheath. Okay, so the center insert in the sheath, these sheaths are they're basically identical, but with the exception of a few things. The centerpiece here is thicker on the Buck than it is on the clone. The leather work on the Buck looks like it had more prep work done to it before the sewing began. The sewing work done on the cheaper version looks like it looks like the sewing is done a little bit tighter. It also looks like, let's see here, I can already see some of the glue is coming apart in the stitching there. It's probably because they used rubber cement instead of contact cement. In the Buck, they used a higher quality glue, so that's one place where the Buck does have a little bit better quality than the Harbor Freight. The leather is just a hair thicker, maybe an ounce thicker on the Buck sheath than the Harbor Freight sheath. So let's go to how it sits on the belt. So on this sheath, it's held in with a smaller rivet, and the rivets on it aren't. The rivets on the belt loop are a little bit looser than the Buck. The Buck's tighter. The Buck, its belt loop is folded, so it goes up, and then it's in here. You can see the inside piece of it, and so it's doubled the whole way down. This one is not doubled. It just ends right there. What that means is that the Buck it's going to be less likely to have its belt loop come apart because it's fastened in multiple places, and with a better rivet system. So there's that. They both have a plastic insert inside the sheath. That's the one from Harbor Freight, and that's the one from Buck. Let's see here. Anything else about the sheath? The decorative lining that you see right here is deeper on this one. How about the quality of the buttons? Quality of the button, it looks like, okay, the quality of the button is better on the Buck. It has a thicker wall than the one on the cheaper one. Let's see here. Also, the top part here on the Buck, it's rounded, where this one is square. They are probably just trying to do something to make it sort of different up there. I don't like how square that is. I almost would rather it just was clipped off like that. Then the button on the Buck sits on the front of the sheath, where on the clone it sits on the outside. Let's see here. Things line up better on the Buck too. The top of the centerpiece and the front and the back all line up. On this one right here, they aren't exactly level. It's not really a big deal. It's just a thing to notice. So thinner leather. The components are not quite as high quality. And the stitching on the Buck, I think the Buck has a slightly higher quality thread. Yeah, it feels like there's some kind of a proper thing added to the thread to make it a little bit stronger on the Buck. All right, so that's the Buck, and that's the clone. All right, now let's move over to the knives themselves. All right, let's start at the bottom. Okay, so the grip on these two. So the Buck has kind of a big grip. A lot of people have commented to me that they feel like the Buck's grip is a little bit too big. Specifically the Buck 119, that's the only knife we're talking about today. The grip's a little bit big, a little fat, and so you see the shape of it there. On the knockoff, I'm going to say the knockoff actually has a better feeling grip, or the clone. I like the clone's grip a little bit better. I also don't like this very much. I just don't like the way that feels. On the clone, there's a little bit of a groove for just the index finger, and the rest of the hand just sits. And then it's, instead of, it comes in tighter below the swell, where the buck is more gradual. So the handle, okay, the polish as well on the buck is a higher polish than the one on the clone, which you could argue that there's a pro and a con. On the one hand, this one looks a little more fancy. On the other hand, this one is going to blend in better with the nature environment and not reflect as much. So yeah, I gotta say that the handle comfort I like more on the knockoff. Now, if we go to the base on both these knives is pretty similar. The base on the clone is thicker at the bottom than on the buck. I think the dog's head. Let's see here. On the clone, it bottlenecks in tighter before it comes back out. On the buck, it's just slightly bigger. Man, I don't know if you can tell or not just by looking at it on the camera. And then also on the clone, it's bigger than on the buck. Let's see here. So let's look at guard size. The guard on the clone is slightly wider than the guard on the buck. And also the guard is actually better shaped on the clone than on the buck. It's more oval, less square. The buck has inconsistency. One side is curved in like perfectly, and then the other side isn't curved in as well. So on the clone, the guard looks better than the buck, in my opinion, and it is more symmetrical. Although back here on the back end, there is a deviation and a flaw. Okay. The guards outside of that, there's nothing really to add. Polish on the buck is just higher. Okay, the finger swell on the buck is too small, or the finger choil on the Ricasso here is too small. Anytime I put my finger there, I can feel the bottom of the blade digging it in. On the clone, it's bigger, and I still can feel the blade touching my skin. I wouldn't feel super comfortable if I was using it like this. I could trust that. But on the buck, even on the tip of my finger, I have to get all the way to there. So, and I don't have very big hands. If you had really big hands, neither one of these would really fit your need, but the Harbor Freight would do a little bit better. Okay, spine. These knives looks like they are the exact same thickness. However, I'm looking at them, and they are not. The knife over here looks like it's about, let's see here, I'm guessing the buck is about 0.15, and if I was going to guess, the knockoff is probably 0.157 inches, that is. So it's not a whole lot thicker, it's just a tiny bit thicker. I'm trying to get an idea of how thick the tang into the handle is. It looks like the tang on the knockoff might be a little bit thicker going down into the handle. So your blade width. Blade width on the knockoff is wider. So there is more knife all around in terms of how much metal there is in the knockoff. Let's see here. The height of the spine. Well, the spine on the clone goes all the way to the end here. And the spine on the buck stops right there where it goes to the clip. And then the clip is a false edge. But this one has no false edge in the clip. It is flat all the way to the tip. Now what does that mean? It means that if these two have a equal heat treatment, that this one's going to be tougher because it has more structure on the back end. And the clip never has an edge, even all the way to the end, all the way to the point. There's no edge. Okay, the depth of So the bucks, actually, you know what? Strength in the clip might be the same between these two, because while this one has while the clone has a deeper grind line than the buck does. You see how the buck's is smaller here. The buck's is at a steeper angle, so there's more material moved off this one, even though the buck actually has its backside meat. Now, the fuller on each knife. Let's see here. Okay, so these knives have. Wait, let's cover the grind. So both these knives have a hollow grind. Let's take a look at this hollow grind here. Now, this buck has been through plenty with me, and I've resharpened it a couple times. Okay. Looks like the grinds are pretty much the same on both of them in terms of them being a hollow grind and the depth to which they're ground. Visually, if you were to look at them right now, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference or you wouldn't be able to tell they're exactly the same because I've worked on the buck and I've used the buck a lot in my videos and in abuse and stuff like that. So it doesn't have the same wear and tear that this one has. Now, out of the box, the buck was shaving sharp. This knife, I thought it was shaving sharp, but it's inconsistently shaving sharp. So some parts of this blade. Okay, I'm going to say out of the box, the buck was sharper out of the box. Out of the box, the buck could bite hair in any direction and work just fine. So the buck out of the box comes sharper. So let's see here. What else do we have? So the tips. Let's move up to the tips. The tips of the knife. Okay. Now, I've beat up the... Okay, I'm going to say it right now. The buck has a more durable tip. The clone's tip is... Oof, that is a skinny tip. Okay, so the tip on the clone is, in fact, going to be more brittle than the tip on the buck. More than likely, when they were trying to make this knife, they were trying to, clone the buck. But one of the things that happens with some of these companies that are trying to produce clones is they do a lot of work on just producing what they can, and they don't pay attention to how skinny certain things get, because this got kind of skinny. Where, let's see here. Sorry, I got a message on my phone. Where there's just a little bit more meat on the buck. All right, so here is the clone, fresh out of the box, its edge. And phone book paper is pretty thin. So, there you go. So we'll slice the phone book paper. So it's doing okay. Now the buck, I don't think it has much of an edge right now. I just got done putting it through an abusive video, but let's see here. Yeah, it's still got some damage from where I ran it into a brick. Okay. Now the question is, how good is the heat treatment? And that's what we're going to go to next.